This is the I Read Comic Books podcast, the very best podcast for regular comic book fans. I'm your host, Mike Rappin, and joining me this week, a pair of horrific comic books that surely have demented the minds of young children. This week, I'm joined by Kait Lamphere.
Definitely sounds like me.
And Nick White.
It's going to be a true bonfire of the vanities.
Thank you both for joining me this week. I'm very excited to talk about comic books because, I don't know, it's episode 501, and like, who even gives a shit anymore? No, I do. I care. But we are here to talk about our Goodreads Book of the Month as picked by our 2025 Reading Challenge finishers. This is Dr. Werthless by Harold Schechter and Eric Powell. You may know that team from the book Did You Hear What Eddie Gein Done? A book that I was obsessed with when it first came out. We are, for the record, going to be talking about this book in its entirety. So if you haven't read this book, hit pause. Go read it. It's a quick, easy, fun, breezy read, I promise. And then come back to this episode and start listening. I do want to say there is a big, huge flag of content warnings. I want to talk about this book. This book does discuss murder and violence and all sorts of depravity. There's some child abuse in it. There's various deviant behaviors, things that honestly like pretty unsettling, and it is important to the book's context, at least in my opinion. But just a heads up, this book is a little heavy, not only on words, but in the content as well, especially in the first half. But anyways, we're here to talk about this book. Like I said, Dr. Werthless. Kait, Nick, I'm curious, maybe we'll start with you, Nick. What is your history with the so-called Dr. Werthless, aka Dr. Wertham, this villain of comic books who is a little bit more of a complex person than first let on?
Yeah, just a little bit. That's that's how you get to 200 pages, right? I think my background is probably right around where it is for I think a lot of comic book readers. I'm going to speak for everyone, I guess. Apparently, I think it really just can be summed up in a sentence or two. Old dude who went after comics in somewhere around like I think. In my mind, I thought it was somewhere around like the 30s or 50s, somewhere around there, and nearly brought it to its knees with a real crusade to, deal with censorship, basically, in terms of he had issues with the violence and mainly the violence. That's about it. That's really it. And then I knew that on some level he was linked to the comics code, that somehow he ushered it in or had something to do with it. And that was pretty much it.
Okay. Kait, what about you? What's your history with Fredric Wertham?
This is the first time I think I've ever heard his name.
Awesome. You did read the book for this episode, right?
I did, yes.
Okay, good. Well, no, that's interesting. Nick, I'm pretty much in the same boat as you. I think my history with Fredric Wertham as a person is like the villain of comics. He's the reason why comic books were so goofy in the 60s and 70s and why we had to crawl and claw and fight back to get violence and sex back into comics. I don't know. That's the picture that I had in my head. Obviously, the story of this man is a little bit more complex than that. And then obviously the story of comic book censorship is more complex than that. And that's what this book covers. Dr. Werthless is about this man, Fredric Wertham, and his life as he went from a psychologist who did a lot for people in New York, especially people of color as well, but became obsessed with this idea of comic books being the root of all evil in the minds of the youth. He wrote this book, Seduction of the Innocent, that maybe you've heard of. But I think Harold Schechter and Eric Powell do a really good job of portraying him as more than just the censorship guy, because I think on the whole, Fredric Wertham is a weirdly progressive person. He just like couldn't get past comics, and I think that's the tale that happens in this book. But Kay, I'm curious, where were you after you got a little bit into this book? Like, what were your thoughts after the first couple chapters?
Yeah, I didn't know how this is going to like lead into being anti-comic book, because it really does cover more of his work, like studying, like psychoanalyzing and helping, communities of color. He like opened like almost a free clinic, very nearly free at one point. And I'm like, how does this guy end up being a guy who hates comic books?
Sure.
Like he's like a very staunch personality. Like he was like hard on the things that like his values and stuff. Like he was unmovable about things, and I could tell that early on.
Yeah. I mean, Nick, I'd be curious to know your thoughts here. I mean, like, I think we're kind of stepping over a lot of the finer details here. But the one thing that I found to be really interesting is like the whole book seems to have this common theme of like every time Wertham runs into a problem or gets mistreated in some sort of way, he ends up like writing his mentor and he's just like complaining to his wife. He's like, I'm so much better, I'm so much smarter, all this other stuff, but he can't get the recognition. And it turns out he might not have gotten any of the recognition that he wanted because he was kind of an asshole, right?
Yeah.
Like, Nick, what did you think of this?
I mean, I think if anything else, I think all of us can probably see at least part of ourselves in Dr. Wertham, because he's for everything that we're shown, he's an incredibly just very human person, warts and all. And he's really one of those people, and I think we all know someone like this who's just very brilliant, but just has some real issues with interpersonal interactions, and basically has no problem just shooting themselves in the foot over and over and over again. As you said, there's a moment where I believe he's writing to his supervisor, his previous supervisor he had in America. At this point, he's gone to Germany, right? Because he gets shown the door on his job in America just because he's so difficult to work with. And he writes back and he's like, oh, I might come back to America because I've been promised this job, right? But also I've been promised all of these other jobs, so I might not go back to that job. And also, I'm pretty much well regarded as probably my ex-boss who showed me the door in America. That's right. I'm sorry. I think he's writing this letter to another guy in Germany, right? I think. And he goes, my ex-boss in America basically said I'm probably the best psychiatrist in the whole United States. Like, literally, that's what he says. Yeah. And I'm like, we all have met this guy. Like, and if you're thinking, Nick, you might be, no.
Listen, I wasn't going to say anything.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is going to get interesting.
No. I think that it is interesting because it's like, Wertham finds himself in the middle of, strangely, and I thought this is probably what drew Harold Schechter to this book. Harold Schechter, for those that aren't familiar with his work, he's primarily a writer about murder, right? Yeah. He's written extensively about various serial killers and murder and violence and stuff. So like his interest in this character of Fredric Wertham is such an interesting one. But then you read the first couple of chapters of this book and you go, oh, this makes absolute sense. Now, of course, Schechter does a fantastic job of telling the story from beginning to end, even though it's not all primarily about murder. But it is fascinating to see the fact that Fredric Wertham crossed paths with one of the most notorious and awful serial killers in American history, Albert Fish, right? I'm not going to go into the details of who Albert Fish is and what he did. You can Google that yourself and maybe do it in an incognito browser. But like, it is surprising to see Wertham show up in that story, because Wertham's whole thing, and this is the consistent line for this guy, is that people need to be declared insane in America in order to be treated in the way that he believes that they should be, right? Like that someone like a serial killer like Albert Fish isn't a violent criminal. No. He is a mentally insane person, for, to use the definitions that were in the book, who needs treatment of a different kind in order to curb whatever this is about him. And he believes in rehabilitation, which I think is maybe the most noble thing about Wertham, is that he does believe that there is rehabilitation for all of these people, whether you are a serial killer or you are someone who is just troubled with anxiety. He believes in rehabilitation, which I think is, again, very noble thing.
Right.
But of course, like this book, I think, paints a very interesting picture about like maybe where that comes from by contextualizing the world in which Wertham grows up. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, because Kait, I was curious to hear what you thought about like where Wertham fell into the world, like before he becomes this guy who hates comic books. like those first couple chapters,
Yeah, I feel like he was well-meaning, and I guess in hindsight of like him being, I don't know, it's like he's trying to make all of his patients less, less the bad guy, like they are like victims of their own trauma or something, and I feel like once we get to the part where he like villainizes comic books, it's almost like he was looking for the real bad guy all along.
Sure. Yeah, I think there is a thing like in those first, especially the first two chapters, there's like a depiction of like some pretty rough stuff that I think is important to the story, in the sense that it does kind of put this idea in your head, because you see people blaming pulp novels at the beginning, which I thought was interesting. And it's like every generation has some piece of media that they're going to point to and go, this is the reason why the youth are deranged. And it turns out that the youth have always been deranged, I think, because like at the beginning it's pulp novels, right? And then later we see it's comic books, and then later we see it's video games, and now we see it's social media or TikTok or whatever, right? Like there's going to be like just a generational thing that I think people are going to point at. Maybe before pulp novels there was something else, but I did find that like to be an interesting pattern in this. But yeah, Nick, I don't know, what did you think of that?
Sure. I mean, it's one hell of a cold open, and as you got at, like, it really felt like it was Harold Schechter's work at this point. Schechter,
Yeah.
for those who aren't like overly familiar with him, like you said, he has a pretty established background writing true crime. I think he most recently even wrote a book not just a few years ago about the Bath bombing in Bath, Michigan, about in the middle of the state, where that guy got disgruntled and blew up a whole bunch of, it was like one of the worst bombings ever in American soil, I think. Anyway, it really feels like a Schechter book in that beginning. Yeah, it's like very very dark, and it's leading you through all these different crimes, and you're like, how does this play into Dr. Wertham? Like, where is this going to intersect, right? And you're just being fed several narratives after one another. And as you got at, there is the one about dime novels, which clearly is meant to suggest, right, look, there's always going to be a scapegoat, there's always going to be something that people turn to, and also that this phenomenon, yeah, it didn't begin with comics, and furthermore, that these crusaders like Wertham was not the first crusader. There were people that went after the dime novels just as much back in that era. So the idea that this is just a cycle, and the players and the problems are not unique. They are just named differently at different times. And if you want to discuss why history, turns to these boogeymen at times because they don't want to confront bigger or more, looming issues, that's a 9-hour discussion with someone much more qualified to talk about it than I am. But
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting to see that that's how the book opens, right? And then as we get through, Wertham's life in the later chapters, and he's kind of bouncing between different jobs, and he's trying to figure out, like, what's he going to do? How am I going to get this prestige that I so desperately want and think that I've already earned and I think that I deserve? I mean, like, say what you will about this guy, like, he definitely had his head up his own ass in some ways, thinking that like his shit did not stink, and that he was way smarter than everybody in the room that he was in, and anybody who disagreed with him was just dumb. And like, I feel that way sometimes. In fact, I feel that way a lot of times. But I am not about to like throw away my career because a coworker or a peer of mine disagreed with me, and I'm going to be so belligerent to them that I get let go. Like, we do have to have a little bit of humbleness, and I wish that somebody would have just served him like a nice slice of humble pie to like actually get his head so high out of the clouds. But yeah, I don't know, I found that to be interesting, where it's like he clearly had a mission in what he wanted to do, and he wanted to help people, but like he could not get over his own pride. I don't mean to belabor the point, but I did find it just like almost funny how much you're just like, from an outsider's perspective, it's just like, dude, take a breath and just like look around for a second. It's maybe things are just different. Maybe you didn't have that sort of mentality back in the 30s and 40s and 50s or whatever, but yeah.
And not to armchair psychologize an actual psychologist, but first off, it won't stop me. I'm going to do it. Honestly, the thing that really struck me is that this is a guy who really wants his credit. He doesn't want it being handed off to someone else. He's not. He's certainly not happy when someone else gets the credit for something that he's done. He has no problem taking credit for things that may not be true. And I think what's fascinating, especially when you look at how he doesn't get the credit for a lot of the legal proceedings towards the end. I think that's involving Brown versus Board of Education, right?
Yeah,
and
that was really surprising. Actually, I had no idea that this guy had this cross section with like one of the most.
He's kind of got that whole like Forrest Gump. He keeps stumbling into all of these like major events in American history.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah. But it's fascinating to see him intersect with all these big events for which he probably deserves maybe not as much credit as he thinks, but still a decent amount.
Sure.
And there you have all these incidents where other people just get the credit, or he becomes one of those like forgotten names in history, right? Where you just, whatever. And I think what happens, at least, again, armchair psychologizing here, is he feels like once he hits comics, he's like, I'm going to be the crusader for this. No one else is doing this. No one else is going to take this from me. When all of these different news agencies and these television networks, they want to find the expert to talk to on this issue, it's going to be me because there's nobody else. I'm going to like pave my own road. I'm going to be the guy. No one is going to take this from me. And I'll tell you, and this is what I find so fascinating, is you keep reading towards the end of the book where you have all these people that are basically punching all sorts of different holes in his theories, from just a general standpoint or an academic standpoint. Like, he doesn't back off of his guns. And it's like, geez, for someone so smart, he's just being so incredibly so stupid. And I feel like it's sort of, like I said, he's found his lane and now he can't get out of it. Like, this is the only way he's found now where he's going to get that credit. He's going to get in front of a camera. And Mike, I think you and I talked about this as well, more armchair psychologizing, I guess. But like, for me, in some ways, he feels like that guy who now works for Fox News, who used to want to be a comedian. He's a failed comedian, or he's a failed actor, or he's a failed screenwriter, right?
Yeah.
And he's no good at it anymore. So he has to pivot into demonizing it. Because, right, like Wertham, he writes a frickin' play, right? And he has to convince his coworkers, oh, well, I demonize these books, right? But a play is more nobler, right? A play is a much more noble thing. And then he writes that book, which is basically 7 or 8 true crime stories, sewn together, including Fish and including Robert What's-His-Face, the sculptor. And everybody's like, gee, this doesn't seem that different from the dime novels. And he's like, no, this is a clinical summation of my experiences. And it's like, okay, bud, like, dude, you wanted to be in front of a camera. You wanted the bright lights. We get it. You wanted to be in show business. It didn't work out. And so now you got to pivot. And the more I think about this, the more I actually like this idea. So,
listen, I was going to say, if you flash forward 70 years, that person's running the FBI now. That's where we're at with things. No, it is very interesting to see that, like your point though, Nick, is really, I think, it's right. I think it's accurate in the sense that he wanted the recognition and he would take it from anywhere that he could get. I think what he originally wanted was respect from his peers, respect for the medical practices and industries and all these various institutions. But when he found that he could get that, I think that validation through being interviewed by the news and being the voice who's there to yell about comic books, he was like, oh no, people are taking me seriously, parents are concerned, it's making waves. And I think that's all he wanted. He wanted, like so many of us probably do in the world, to make an impact on things. But it's like, at what lengths will you go? And that's, it's totally what you said. I think that's super apt.
I think the real tragedy is the closure of the Lafargue clinic. I think absolutely broke him. I think if that would have stayed open, and if he wanted all of the credit too, right? Because they mentioned that there were a couple other academics in it's Harlem, right? I think there were other academics in the same area doing similar research, not the same, but similar research. And he felt like they got way too much credit and he didn't get enough credit. And then this place gets shut down. I feel like that completely set the scene for the comic book thing. Because like that was the thing where he seemed actually really truly fulfilled, and then it collapsed.
And that was so confusing to me. Like it was almost this is the like almost free clinic, right? And then it had
Dr. Quarter, right?
Yeah, Dr. Quarter,
And and they were in the basement of a church, and there was a new reverend, and the new reverend was like, actually, this space can be used to serve the community in better ways. And I'm like, what are the better ways than a free clinic?
Right. Yeah. And don't forget when he actually meets with the other people in town working on similar things, and they're like, apparently we don't know what happens, right? The book's like, we don't know what happened, but apparently things went really bad because they never met again and they never talked to each other, and that was it.
Which is, again, it's really upsetting that this guy clearly, like you said, Nick, very fulfilled working in this thing, can't get his head out of his own ass to say, I can swallow my pride for the betterment of these people that I know that I can help, right? And it does beg the question of like, what are you actually trying to do here? Are you actually trying to help people, or are you trying to be like the big man in charge and like have your cake and eat it too in some ways? Right. And I think you have to swallow your pride for this kind of stuff to compromise, you know? So yeah, I didn't consider that idea of that clinic closing being the breaking point for him, because I think the way that Schechter and Powell painted in the book is that like a little boy comes to him and says like, oh, well, I read it in the comic book, so when he shoots him in the eye, that's the part that I like the most. And it's like, little kids are going to be drawn to morbid things because they're new. Like, I don't know if that's going to be the thing that really screws someone up. I think it's funny that he originally had been working on this idea of physical trauma being related to like mental psychosis.
Yeah.
And completely abandons that and starts to get stuck on this idea of like entertainment being that. I mean, I'm just curious. I feel like I'm just talking a lot. I just want to hear the other pieces that you thought were interesting about this book then.
Yeah, I guess I just really like the irony of the guy who hates comic books has his modern biography told through the medium of a comic book.
Oh yeah, beautiful.
And so from there, you guys talked about the other things that the writer had done, but I'm not actually familiar with this artist from anything else. Like, I know that, was he on the Eddie Gein book?
Yes. Eric Powell is like a very long running comic book creator who worked on this series called The Goon, or still works on The Goon, I think.
Still works on The Goon.
I have never read The Goon to save my life. However, I know that people enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's a Deadpool, or not Deadpool, it's a Hellboy-esque. Deadpool-esque.
That's completely, that's spot on. Yeah. I've read most of the first omnibus, and Hellboy is pretty apt. That's good.
Yeah. I mean, it's just it's a big guy, and he's beating monsters up, and he's got a little friend who's kind of funny, but it's very much just like a guy doing stuff. It's little stories, and like Powell's been working on this book for years and years. 2004, maybe earlier than that, he's been working on The Goon. And it's just very well respected. I mean, and you've seen Powell's art in this book, right?
Yeah.
Imagine him drawing monsters. I mean, I think the stuff that he did in Did You Hear What Eddie Gein Done is maybe some of the best work I've seen from him in terms of like capturing the grotesque in a way that feels like not exaggerated in any capacity. Right. Like, I think Powell has the capacity to do exaggeration, but like when he captured some of the more disgusting moments in the Eddie Gein book, I'm just like, no, this is better than me seeing photos of it, but I'm glad that it's not exaggerated by any means. Without being, like a picture perfect drawing of something.
Yeah, they the creators wrote some rear matter about their like decision process with the art, and there was a little bit about them saying that they like decided as to like how much of like caricature to draw into like the faces.
Yeah.
And
I found that to be really interesting.
Yeah, and like they said something about like they pared it way back, but they didn't say that they didn't use any caricature. And then
I just looking at photos of Fredric Wertham, like I really like the way that like Powell stretches out the face of him. Like he doesn't have a significantly long face, but I love the way that Powell really tried to like add a little bit more stretch to him in general. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like when I was actually reading the book, I wasn't thinking at all that these people looked like they were exaggerated physically in any way. Like I didn't pick up on that until I saw a couple of the photos in the back. But he just Eric Powell just did such a good job at making all of the faces in this book look so distinct. And I really appreciate it. Sometimes I feel like I'm a little bit like face blind when I'm reading comics, and I'm like, everyone looks the same.
Well, this book does not suffer from same face. Yeah,
it does, absolutely. Yeah, there are some artists that I think do draw very similar faces. I think Eric Powell, and this is something you can see in all of his books. I think everything that I've seen of his work, he does such a good job of just creating distinct characters and faces and creatures, and like everything he does feels like so dynamic, right? It's very interesting, and again, and this is why I think he's such a celebrated creator in terms of just like his art style. It's just he really knows how to draw a damn good looking comic book. And I mean, this book looks fantastic. I thought that it was particularly like a little bit looser than some of his other work. I think a lot of his other stuff is a lot more precise, whereas this book felt very like he went really hard into the watercolors. And I think the difference between, and I keep comparing Eddie Gein because this, of course, I'm just gonna, but like, comparing it to that, this book is so much wilder in terms of like backgrounds and everything else. Like the things that are crisp and in your face are like the people and their faces, and I think that that's a distinct choice that was made in order to convey like the world around Wertham was not what was important. It was the people that were important to Wertham. Now, talking about comic books and all this other stuff, whatever, but like I think that that was a choice made by Powell to be like the things that should be the most in focus are the people, because that is where Wertham's focus was as a person.
Yeah. I'm also glad that they made this like a one color book. They talk about that in the Ray Matter also. I'm just repeating what the creators are saying. But
listen, who knows? Most of our readers or listeners, they don't read the Ray Matter. I'm certain of it.
But reading through this, like it does kind of feel like it's they do a good job at making the art feel like it is set in the time period that it's written in, like that kind of like rough art sketch style. I don't know why I associate that with the middle of the 1900s, but I feel like if they had put this in color, I would have wanted there to be some kind of homage to the way that comics were printed at the time, with like that really bright, like texture dot grain look, and that would not have matched the tone of this book at all. So I'm glad that they stuck with one color black and white printing.
I thought for a moment there we were like having this revelation about Kait, where like somehow like when Kait feels that like comics before TV went color, right? Comics before then need to be black and white, and somehow like there's like a weird divide for Kait, and I'm like, this is progressing into an odd place, but okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Color didn't exist before that anywhere.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. What did you guys think of the like chapter separators in this book? I thought that was like such an interesting choice to make, like to maybe kind of preview each chapter, or like I don't know, just give us like a focus of something. It's funny, I opened up to a page that I'm just going to show this for the patrons, where you can see this page where it does look like it's in the classic comic book style, right? Where they were talking about the dark ages of things, or the dark legends, a study in murder. But yeah, like each chapter had this beautiful little opening, like the chapter of a person in like this 20s style, right? Like art. I don't know what kind of art. I don't know art at all, guys. I'm not. I went to the Louvre one time. That barely makes me an art expert.
It's kind of cubism. Like cubism was like a 1920s thing, but
yeah, let's see. Look at this is why I have people on the show that are smarter than me, because I never would have gotten there. But yeah, it is a beautiful like portrayal of like the subject matter of that chapter in some way, or like a person that's going to be very important. I thought that was an interesting choice. Like, I don't know how that all ties together other than being like a representation of a different type of art that was prevalent in Wertham's time. I can't remember. Did he have a thing for a certain type of art, or am I going crazy here? Am I making that up? I might be making that up.
I don't remember.
I don't remember anything about art or aesthetics. That's okay.
The thing is, Mike, that there was a lot of text in this comic book.
Do you guys want to talk about the text in this comic book?
Sure.
There was so much.
I think we were bordering on getting Danny to not read this book. That's where we were with the amount of prose. I mean, not prose, but there's a lot of text. It's a very dense book.
Well, it's also
such a thin book. It was a very dense book, you know. But go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at my like borderline psychotic notes, which I typically sometimes I edit at the end, but other times I'm just going blow for blow as I go through the book itself. Like, there's a couple notes where I'm like, why is there all this text? Does this text go away? Does it stop? What's going on?
No,
is it too big? Is it too hard to read? Does it take too much of the panel? Sure seems pretty early in this book. Hope this doesn't continue.
You're telling me that you don't want these big paragraphs of text like I'm showing in the video. Like, it's just a whole page where it's mostly the text from the book. And look, this is not like Brian Michael Bendis 5,000 word bubbles, right? This is like straight up huge chunks of narration. I know that a lot of people had a problem with this. I wouldn't have changed it, in my opinion. I thought that it was great.
I just felt like some of it was a little bit repetitive. Like we mentioned before how Wertham didn't, how he responded to his people that were negative about him, things like that, and his ego. And I'm like, I know this about him now, like, and it keeps being mentioned. Can we get to the next thing in the story? But then also like the font. Okay, so I'm a graphic designer. I have opinions about fonts. The font that they use for the narration is like tall, and it's got serifs on it, and the words and the characters within the words are all really tight. And I'm like, this is like, I read the book, like I clearly didn't give up, but it was hard to read. I would not have chosen this font. That's my hot take.
I think that it was chosen intentionally obviously it was chosen intentionally, but I think that it was like trying to evoke like the same type of font you would expect out of a spooky book. You know what I mean? I don't know. I feel like that's maybe a stretch, but I do think that like they chose this font for a reason. Maybe it's tall and narrow like Wertham was. Right? Maybe that's what they're going for.
I like this. This is
because
really
they do use like kind of your standard comic book font for other things, especially dialogue, right? Like here's a mix of a page, right? That's got the big blocks of text, but it also has a lot of like narration inside of it and the word bubbles and stuff. And I do think that that's interesting. Like the choice to do that maybe was so that they could get away from not having to they didn't have to put boxes around everything. They could just say, this is narration when it's in this font. Or maybe there was some other reason that I'd love to pick Eric Powell's brain about.
You're saying that the font was uptight like Wertham himself?
Yes, Kait, yes. Your figure, yes. But this is a very word-heavy book, Nick. I know that you had some thoughts about this.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's one of those things where it's like it doesn't feel perfect to me, but it's also one of those things where I feel like you could sit down, and I'm sure Kait could probably spend 7 hours on it. It's one of those things where it's like, this doesn't feel right, but also I'm not entirely sure what I would change, right? Because the book is front loaded, and not just in terms of content, but also physically in terms of the space being occupied. The book is front loaded. It's very front loaded. And I think some of that is really Schechter. I think it's Schechter's doing. The guy, for better or for worse, as you make it through this book or you go through any of his other stuff, like, he doesn't seem to want to skimp on the details. He's going to hit on everything, whether it's fully salient or not. And for me, I think that's really one of the big issues I have with it, is it's like, and I think by comparison, right? I think you can take this book and we can take this nonfiction, arguably somewhat true crime narrative. We can stack this book up against, you could go with Kent State by Backderf. You could go with My Friend Dahmer by Backderf. You could go with, Green River Killer by Jeff Jensen and Jonathan Case, right? And you've got these books, many of which are very dense, have a lot of citations, have a lot of research that went into them. And I think when you look at some of these other books, they manage to hit the ground running, and they manage to have a better flow right out of the gate, so much more than this book does. And those books, I would argue, certainly at least at the beginning, look more like sequential art. The beginning of this book, first 30 to 40 pages, does not look like sequential art. It looks like it's text, but there's a nice accompanying picture for you to look at. It does not resemble sequential art. And certainly for some people who, and I mean, this is a little bit of a, maybe you got blinders on, but people who have an issue, and I have this feeling a little of like comic books should look like comic books. I'm just a huge sequential art purist. Yeah, it's kind of like, this isn't a comic book. This is a book that also happens to have pictures. It's interesting to compare it and then say, well, how did those guys do it different? How did they manage this? And the answer is like, I don't remember exactly how Jensen does it, but Backderf has 30 to 40 pages in the back of footnotes and citations. So you can just go back and read that stuff. And that stuff is actually really compelling and it's really interestingly well written. But so again, I don't know.
Just to be clear,
that, right?
The footnotes in like Backderf's work, which I agree, the Kent State stuff is actually really interesting because he doesn't just add like footnotes. It's like a full him breaking down all the various moments of the book that he was like, and I pulled this, I drew this scene because I wanted to highlight this thing I read from this book, blah, blah, blah. Like it's a very good, it's almost like an afterword to give you more context on the book that Backderf was trying to say. Like it almost was like he was trying to get you through the book to be like, you need to experience this.
Right.
But there is a ton of extra context that I could give here, but I'm choosing not to because this is a comic book first. I totally get that.
It's almost like, how some people say like their first read with a book, they can barely concentrate. There's too much stuff. It's too overwhelming and it merits a second read and they have to go back to really absorb. Like, I feel like Backderf in some ways was like, fuck that. I don't want to ruin the first read. I want you to get through the first read, enjoy it, not have it be this misery thing. And then the second time you can get some of that stuff, but we're not going to damage or harm the first read like I could have.
Sure.
I don't know. These are just the dumb things I think about, right?
Listen, I totally recognize that and I respect that. I think that this book reads fine. I think it reads like a book that's double its length, right? In a different world, this book has more sequential art and all of the dialogue and the extra stuff is broken up. It's not 186 pages, it's 300 pages, right? And it does take its time to breathe. We get more stuff of seeing things, but I have to ask the question, what value does that add to the story of this person, right?
And it's interesting, right? Because like he goes hyper front loading, hyper exposition at the beginning, but at a certain point, right? He says like, okay, like now we can, and you see it. I think maybe around chapter 2, you see the book start to resemble more of a comic book. And again, like, do I think he did the right thing or the wrong thing? I don't know, but it's just fascinating because clearly, obviously, I am certain a lot of discussion and debate went into how dense is this book? How much do we load it? And I'm sure the decision for those first 30 to 40 pages to be a dense exposition dump that in some ways, like I said, does not look like a conventional comic book. And also in terms of Powell and Schechter stuff, does not look like a Powell or Schechter book. I don't think even Ed Gein really looked quite like this. But I and again, I don't mean to like keep going back to like Nick and I's DMs talking about this book before this, but like I think you made a point about how Schechter, I think, approached Eddie Gein with this thought of people know who this guy is, at least to a certain extent, right? Whereas I think that a lot of people don't know who Dr. They don't even
Fredric
have that
Wertham
one
is.
Sentence synopsis that you or I do. Right. They don't even have that.
Right. And so in order to get that through people's heads, it's like you got to know all this bullshit to get to this story because it is a compelling story, but without all the context that we get in chapter 1 and in my opinion chapter 2, like none of this makes sense later, right? Like you could drop somebody in to chapter 3 or the end of chapter 2, but I think that nothing would be as meaningful if you didn't have all that buildup. To which, like, I wonder, should this have been less of a straight comic book graphic novel and more of like a mix of prose and comic books together?
Media,
but I do think that the point that was made earlier by Kait, I think, is that like the irony is that this is a comic book and it should be a comic book in order to be like, guess what? This was the best way to tell your story, right? So very interesting. I did want to point out one other thing. Unless you guys had more thoughts about the density of this book, I can not move on.
No, I oh, go ahead, Kate.
Nick had said that he felt like the front of the book was like heavy, like loaded heavily, and I feel like the both ends are
The end
are
of
heavy
no,
loaded.
no,
Yeah.
you're completely right. I didn't even think that didn't even occur to me. Yeah, it gets real dense at the end too. Yeah.
It doesn't. I don't really know if it lets up, like, because the beginning is very dense, but then it's immediately very traumatic. Like, you're getting all of these stories that he's hearing from, like, the patients that he's trying to treat for murder.
Right, when it
And-
actually turns into sequential art, you're like, I actually don't want to see the things
Yeah.
that I'm seeing now, right?
Yeah.
Like, I asked for more pictures and now I regret that. Yes.
Yeah. But then you get to the end, and like, I'm not like a courtroom like drama kind of person. Like, I don't really I don't enjoy those scenes in like TV or other comics or like the memes or anything like that. And then you get to the courtroom, which is very important and very interesting, but that's where I feel like it was the most heavy in prose.
Oh,
And
did
I
your
think,
eyes glaze over then too?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh.
I mean,
Yes.
it is very dense, them trying to sum up a whole court case.
Yeah.
Right. He's like, I'm
In a
going to
couple
do
of
like
pages.
3 months of court in 2 pages
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
That's fair. That's fair.
And it was like,
That's
this is what I'm here for. Like, I want to know about what led to the Comics Code Authority and like what he
Yeah.
said in the courtroom and like the EC Comics guy's story and you know, how people are responding to that. But there's just so much text to read.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting, Mike, is that you mentioned that we have to acknowledge the fact that there's probably a lot of people coming into this book who don't even have that knowledge base that a lot of people had coming into Ed Gein. And it almost makes me wonder, in some ways, if maybe part of the way that you sell or you market this book, possibly even to people that really aren't that interested in comics, is that in a lot of ways, it's not that comic centric.
Oh, sure. It's a biography about a man and happens to touch on comics. I totally agree with that.
You can
right?
you can sell this book. I mean, obviously, I think the cover literally says "Guy Who Killed Comics," and I get that, but
Sure.
but I think there are definitely ways that you can pitch this book and you can sell this book where it's like, you don't need to know anything about this guy. Heck, you don't even need to know anything really about comics or even like comics. It's still going to be an interesting biography. Like we said, he's got that Forrest Gump shit going on. So it's like, if you're interested in just the the ongoings of American history in the 20th century, like, it's got a whole lot of that. So anyway,
The thing I do wonder is if maybe people know about this story because of EC Comics, especially with all of the EC Comics and all the imprints coming back.
yes,
I wonder, like, again, I think the timing of this book is definitely not a coincidence,
right?
in some ways.
Yeah,
Where like
Yeah.
Oni Press starts publishing all these books, you know, every publisher's got now their own horror line because it's popular. I wonder if like people are going to know it from the EC Comics side, and then they'll be wondering, okay, when do we get to find out about what happened to EC Comics as part of this, which is unfortunately only a blurb in the book, because again, this is about Wertham. It's not about the Comics Code Authority. Like, that is a touch of his life, but it is not the entirety of who he is as a person. Again, another reason why I appreciate this book is because it didn't spend all of its time building up to the Comics Code and then spend the rest of the book talking about the Comics Code. Because Wertham, while he was pivotal and he did constantly bring up comics, it wasn't like that was all that he did and all that he was. But
and
I
think
find
that could have
EC
been the
Comics,
easy way out, right? I feel like that could have been,
exactly.
yeah.
I think a lesser writer does that.
Yep.
Right. But I did find the EC Comics stuff very interesting because I don't think I knew the full story behind that character or that guy.
Oh,
where,
Bill
like,
Gaines.
Yeah, Bill Gaines. Like, I knew that he took it over and he was a staunch defender. But I didn't realize that it was like, oh no, he inherited this from his dad. He didn't even want to do it. And then it turns out he loves it. Like, I don't know. I thought that was so funny.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
his
when
dad's
he
like,
was-
what a failure, and then dies in a boating accident. And
Yeah.
it's
Sure,
like,
sure,
good
sure.
God.
Yeah, and like he was getting like grilled in the courtroom at the end, and I was like, this guy just took it in his dad's business and he made it successful. Like, give this man a break.
Well, I mean, he made it successful by like tapping into the thing that he that people wanted, right? Like he knew that people wanted to do these horror books and that they should have all this stuff in these comics. I mean, like if you look at some of those old EC comics and stuff, I don't think they're as gruesome as books that you can buy on the shelves this week, right? But they are pretty grotesque, right? Like this, and it's they're couched with all of this racism and misogyny and all this stuff. Like a quarter of the stories are about like guys cutting their wives' head offs because they want to, right? Like it's like, okay, like, can we do anything else for a second? Like, can we just go back to aliens and knights and shit like that? I don't know. So there are some points that I think are valid, right? Like these things were baked in with a ton of like racism and bigotry and misogyny and stuff. So like on that note, I can agree. But like, do we need to shut the whole thing down? I don't think so. Like that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which I'm sure Wertham would have hated that phrase. So, but yeah, I don't know. I thought that was a really interesting piece of this as well. And I think along that like line, I was just flipping through the pages here, and I remembered that scene that I mentioned earlier about like the young boy who tells Wertham like, "Oh, I read this comic book and it's violent." But like the scene leading up to that is the little boy wakes up. He's going to go to talk to Dr. Wertham. On his way out, his parents start fighting. As he's leaving the house, he sees someone getting mugged or getting stabbed or something, and he has to step over somebody who's like passed out on the ground, and there is a world around him that is very violent. But the thing that Wertham seems to grasp onto is the comic book piece, not any of this other stuff. But the boy doesn't mention the world around him. The only thing the boy mentions is the media he's consuming, right? And I think that, again, I think this Schechter and Powell making a statement, and this isn't anything that's like fully documented, and maybe there are psychologists and people who are smarter than me who could say that yes, this is actually like how people get, it's their environment that can be a cause on how violence gets into the minds of people. But yeah, I don't know. I've listened to enough like serial killer stuff to know that it's like straight up head trauma, really bad parents, and like violence being like an normal exchange as part of their life. Like these are the things that make violent tendencies in people. And I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a doctor by any means, but like there's a little bit of a pattern, right? Or maybe it's just a correlation and I'm just a dummy, but still.
Well, I mean, the whole book begins with a quote, right, about the debate of nature versus nurture, right? So
yeah. And I think that's what the chapter 2 thing is about, right? Is about showing these violent people who come from these violent backgrounds and they've had violence inflicted on them, and then they inflict violence on others. And that's not like a perfect, thing by any means, but I did find that interesting. And I think, again, it's important to include in the book because it does add background to the world that Wertham was in. Not to repeat myself too much, but there was a lot of discussion about it, I know on the Discord and everything, and I'm just going to reiterate it here. But yeah. Anything else you guys thought about this book? Did you like it? Did you think you'll read it again? Do you think you'll recommend it to a friend?
Nope. Oh, gosh. Wow.
Kait, you're shaking your head, so I got to know. You look shocked. You're like, how dare you ask me this question?
Yeah, this is not okay. So I like comic book biographies. Like, I don't think that I would have read nearly as many biographies in my life if they weren't so prolific in comic book form. So I do appreciate that like books like this are made. And I think that like this was a really interesting subject. I can definitely see why the creators chose this person to write a comic book about. Like, definitely like super interesting. Like you're like Forrest Gump. Like he touches on so many other things in his life. So I get it. But this was a lot for me.
Okay.
Jenny, don't burn the Action Comics #1, Jenny.
Listen, I'm trying to think. I think I want to call him like the Forrest Gump of murder, but I don't know if that's right.
No. That makes him sound like a nice guy.
I know. Anyways, I can't wait for that comic book from James Tynion in the future. Do you think you would recommend this to someone though?
Gosh, it would have to be like a very specific person. Like I could recommend this to you, but clearly you've already read it.
Sure.
Yeah, I can't.
I mean, if anybody recommends me anything, I'm going to read it. So I'm a bad example.
Yeah, it definitely have to be somebody who's got a stomach for like a violent, traumatic read about a guy who's not very nice. Ultimately.
Okay. Nick, what about you? What are your like, I guess, last thoughts here? Would you recommend this book to somebody? You think you'll reread it next year when you're like, you want a light read?
Yeah, just like easy breezy, might as right next to just the collection, the book that's like just a collection of Garfield strips, right? And it's like which one am I picking up tonight on the nightstand? Yeah, it's a tough book to recommend because I think you just have to be very cognizant of like like what's your level of tolerance for like mature content, right? Because clearly this book has anything and everything, right? You got a dude with like 29 needles in his abdomen or whatever, like it's that's where it's going. That's where it's going. And
is it weird for me to say that that's not the first time I'd seen that picture before?
Yeah, that is weird. That's definitely, I've read enough true crime stuff, and that was the first time I encountered
interesting
that. Okay. Yeah, I think there's a lot here to get at that I think is just fascinating. Like the fact that he makes this play, right, called like, what is it, Dark Justice, Dark Violence, Dark Legend, and James Lipton is like the lead actor. James Lipton, who is the warden in Arrested Development, right? So you've got this play about violence, and then the lead actor goes on to play the warden of this prison. I found that I when I read that, I was like, I wonder if they were aware that connection was there, or if that's just a really curious the fact that they cast Lipton and then made him the warden, that just seems so I was like, am I really connecting A to B here and I shouldn't be? Because that was just
this feels like a huge stretch. I mean, for the rest of you who don't know, James, or who may not get this reference that Nick is talking about, James Lipton also hosted the famous television series Inside the Actors Studio, which is what I knew him from. I forgot that he was on Arrested Development, but he definitely is famous for other things than that.
Yeah, sure. The other thing I did really love to point out is I really love the moment where he reads comics for the first time, and in that sequence it intersperses moments that I have to believe are from real comics, right? Clearly, like for a while there I was like, is this just Powell doing a different style? Because I'm pretty sure the Dark Victory thing, that was definitely still Powell. It was just a different aesthetic, right?
Yeah.
But this one where he's reading comics for the first time, that's definitely real comics drawn by someone else. And what I found so interesting is, right, and this is not that subtle, I picked up on it, so it can't be that genius level, right? He intersperses these real comics with these portraits that are clearly like modern art. They're very clearly modern art, and it zooms out and it shows Powell. It shows Wertham reading the comic book. It's zoomed out, and behind him is this large modernist looking painting that appears to be made up of the artwork that were in the smaller rectangles that were put alongside these comics. And obviously, I say obviously, in my perspective, clearly what Schechter and Powell are saying is like this modern art behind him and these comic books that he despises, that he hates, like, I'm literally going to put them on equal footing, right? They're in the same size panel. They're right alongside each other. One is not bigger than the other. One is not taller than the other. They're literally on equal footing. And they're one and the same. Even though this guy seems to hate them, they're on the same level. I thought that was clever.
I think it's a great observation. Like, I think, and that's again what Powell and Schechter are saying is like, this is all art, right? It's just his interpretation, or I mean his viewing of the I don't want to say his interpretation, like it's hard to misinterpret like a woman being hung in a tree, right? But I think that it is something. Like, I'm looking at that page right now. I bet you $5 some of this is Powell, maybe some of it's not.
I debated that for
to which
while.
I'm like, Powell, you're drawing some pretty rough stuff, because there's some portraits of people that are not great. But no, it's really interesting. I think that's a very nice observation. Did you guys catch the very subtle Jack Kirby, not so subtle Jack Kirby that was in this book? where they're talking about cartoonists and how like the people who make these comics are some of the most depraved individuals, and there's a guy with a big old stogie in his mouth is just like, turn the TV off,
like,
something like
the
that
end for us. Right.
He's like, don't be a coward, all this is gonna blow over, nobody's gonna ever listen to that guy, and it's this guy with a big old stogie in his mouth. I mean, like, who else could that be? Stan Lee? I don't think so.
Well, is that Wallace Woods or Wally Woods? Because like I know, one of the guys, I thought Wally Wood at one point is like, well, it's over for us now, and then later we find out that he commits suicide.
Yeah. I mean,
that was messed up.
It's crazy to think about like the impact that this congressional hearing had on like an industry that was clearly booming, right? I mean, the fact that there were just thousands and thousands of books being published and tons of different publishers, everyone's trying to, copy each other. I think you mentioned this on a recent episode, Nick, maybe somebody else did, about how
Eerie?
like Eerie only existed because someone wanted to copyright the name before another publisher got to it, right? Like that is the insanity of the prevalence of these books, right? Like horror books and violent books and all this other stuff.
I think modern readers don't have an idea or understand the scope and scale of comic books at that point. Right. And
I think we forget that it was, and again, I think I'm just saying what you said, Nick, is like, it was, the prevalence was that everybody was reading it, not just kids. Like adults were going to the newsstand and picking up comics, not for the superheroes, but to be like, let's see what fucked up dark shit I can read this week.
Or romance comics were huge.
But like, think about it. I'm not one of those people yet. But people are obsessed with Stranger Things. We watch shows like Game of Thrones. We watch shows like Walking Dead. Is that not just the modern day equivalent of the violence that we saw in these comics? And how many people are completely fucked up and deranged because of these TV shows, right? Is not moving picture and sound more impactful on the minds of young people? What
about Slender Man?
Than a book? Slender Man, I mean, that's a whole other thing, but like it's the same thing. I mean, some people are affected by these things, but they are less frequent than I think pundits want to exclaim. So I think it's interesting that like we see the prevalence of all this other stuff, and comic books still haven't completely recovered, right? I think we're getting into the dark and twisted stuff. Romance books had a moment for a second. Horror books are clearly blowing up, but like they are not even close to the prevalence that they once were. It's very interesting. And again, only a small modicum of this man's life was represented by that, right? He was an entire individual. And again, I have to respect Schechter and Powell's depiction of him by the end of this to be like, he was more than just that, even though that was a big thing that he had caused. So yeah, I don't know. As far as me recommending this book, I don't think I'd recommend this to anybody. I like this book. This is a 5 out of 5 for me. I had a fantastic time reading this. I actually really enjoyed the density of it. I enjoyed the what I felt like was objective telling of this man's life in a way that didn't feel disrespectful, right? I felt like they could have spent a lot of time being like, what a fucking asshole. Right. Look at all these times that he was a dick. But they were like, he was a stubborn individual and it didn't help him in life. He did all of this other stuff. And all these other things happened. Like they could have been so much worse about him. Yeah. And I found that to be great. Like I think that's the sign of like a good author and a good like pair of storytellers here. Would I hand this to somebody who didn't have a passing interest in like the cross of like the American zeitgeist? I think no. Right. But like I know nerds who are like that and would love this book, even with its density. Now they might question and go, why wasn't this just a book? And I go, well, because it's a comic book. And then I'd sit them down and have a long conversation about the importance of comic books in our modern society. But they would at least listen to me rather than most people who would just run off or change the subject. So yeah, I don't know. I really liked this, but I would have a hard time recommending it. I think that is my final say.
Yeah, I think ultimately if you're coming to this for a discussion about comics, there are other books that might be more direct. And certainly if you're coming to this for a discussion about true crime, it's hard to just not say, go read Ed Gein.
Yeah. Eddie Gein is a much better book for that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an ambitious book. Oh no!
Even Bendis's torso.
No. Mike, I would not go that far. No. That's a bridge too far.
Maybe we'll talk about that in the post credits for a minute. Kait raised her eyebrows in a way that I think we need to explain.
So I need to know what this is.
So I guess to wrap up here, like it seems like this is a tough book. I guess the last question I will ask you guys is like, and I'll start with you, Nick. Did you enjoy reading this book? Did you like hate it, or was it a chore, or did you at least get something out of it?
I think, like I said earlier, there was a certain anxiety for the first 30 to 40 pages of, is the rest of the book going to be like this? And it's not that I hated the first 30 to 40 pages, but like I said, just hard to read, not really sequential art. But after that, I don't know if enjoyed it. I guess you could say it's always tough to say you enjoyed something that on so many levels is fucked up, but I found it illuminating.
That's not what I'm asking. Yeah. Thank you. That's what I'm asking. Thank you.
I mean, if anything else, I think this discussion proves that it's a book people can engage with. That's for sure. People are going to come away with thoughts, right? That's the mark of at least, something worth picking up.
Absolutely. Well, Kait, what about you? Where are you sitting with this book?
I did struggle with this in parts.
Sure.
So like, I don't know. I think that the question I keep coming back to is, if I was reading this just for me and not for the Goodreads reading challenge or for this this episode, like, would I have finished the book? And I'm not sure. Like, I think that I might have like skimmed quite a few parts, like not made like a committed thorough reading. Particularly of like the history of like the violent sections and then the courtroom section. But this was like, I mean, it was a worthwhile read. I'm glad that I read it. And that's all that I've got to say about that.
Just
like
laying
that.
it all out on the line here.
I like it. Well, I think that's a great place for us to wrap up here. We've been talking for what easily 30 minutes more than I thought we would about this book. So I'm very pleased. I hope everybody out there got a chance to read this. This is the first book in our reading challenge for the year. We've got 12 more months coming up of books, as well as at least I think it's a total of 31 books total on our reading challenges here. And if you want to complete all of them, we totally encourage you to. But if you complete 24, you can help us pick a book for next year. But yeah, this is a great start to the year. I think let's start with like a big old book, and then next month, February's theme of the month is feel good comics. So you know what? pick up your Bee and Puppy Cat comics. Pick up your Chihaya Furu book. Let me try to think of something that's not a manga that's very nice.
T-Dragon Society.
T-Dragon Society, which we've already read. But either way, pick up those books and read them for the challenge and feel good after reading a little book about murder in some other guy's life. But thank you both for your time tonight recording. This is the 501st episode, and I feel like there's something special about that. It's very exciting. Go buy some merch, ircbpodcast.com/shop. I meant to say it at the top of the show, and I totally didn't. And yeah, I think that's it for us tonight. So thanks, Kait and Nick. Thank you to Zander for editing. Thanks to Paul for proof listening tonight. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.